Chapter 190. It had been just a few seconds since Klein finished speaking. They were all still standing in the center of the gym, murmuring about the prize for success, pizza, and teammates. Only a couple of people had taken steps toward the starting line. Nobody was prepared for Vandy's mother, who had been standing politely off to the side while the instructors explained what was going on, to suddenly lift her hands and point them at the group. Alden was in the process of making eye contact with his roommates, trying to silently ask if they would all be teaming up, when the burst of wind hit everyone. He staggered and would have fallen if not for Hoyu reaching out to grab his arm. Hoyu's feet were firmly planted, no doubt thanks to an application of his spell impression. Whether it was foresight or he was just in the habit of starting class by casting it, it was coming in handy now. All around them, people were toppling over and crashing into their neighbors. Alden hadn't fully regained his balance, never mind processing the fact that wind could blow this hard, when Everly Kim, who'd been standing in front of them, flew backwards into him. Her feet had completely left the ground. He wrapped his free arm around her automatically, more like a monkey grabbing at a branch than a true savior, and held on. She helped out by clinging just as hard. Hoyu had a grip on Khan's gym suit with his other hand. When the gust stopped as abruptly as it had begun, they were in the minority who were still upright. Classmates were on the floor, or, in some cases, across the floor even farther from the starting line. We haven't had a chance to talk about who we're going to partner up with. Vandy. Be on my team. My team. That was like a tornado. I bet that was what a tornado is like. Alden let go of Everly, who crouched low and pointed her face toward Gallicourse like she was trying to prep for round 2. He followed suit because for all he knew she was about to fly right back into him. Instructor Klein's expression was inscrutable. I said we start now. Gallicourse lifted her hands once more. Oh, okay, Alden thought as Everly had a change of heart and scrambled along with Khan to get behind Hoyu. They are not even going to let us get to the starting line without a fight. The fresh blast of wind hit him right in the face. He leaned against the pressure of it, keeping his knees bent, debating whether or not it was safe to move a foot so that he could get behind Hoyu, too. Over the shouts of his classmates and the rush of air in his ears, he heard a loud clang and looked to her instructor. Waker had bounded over toward his junk pile again. It was all the way over on the other side of the finish line. In what couldn't possibly be a positive development for his students, the huge brute was lifting a front-loader washing machine over his head with one hand. It looks an awful lot like he's aiming at us. Hoyu! Alden shouted, targeting Big Snake hastily because that was what he sometimes did when the instructor was about to throw something at him, and in the heat of the moment, he couldn't find answers in his head for relevant questions like, am I actually capable of catching a washing machine? Are they a lot lighter than they look? Hit me with it. Hoyu roared. I don't think that's the correct response, Alden said. Get behind me, everyone. I've got this. Everyone was just Alden, since Everly and Khan were already crouching behind him, and Lexi was on his knees a short distance away. He hit one hand splayed on the floor and the other on Ruther. The thin gold chain of the whip was the only thing in Alden's view that was behaving like the wind didn't exist, undulating in front of Lexi protectively in what was often its default position when its master was both feeling threatened and lacking a clear enemy. Before Alden could get more of a handle on the situation, the wind cut out, and the washing machine plunged toward them. Damn. His hands were up. Hoyu's right fist was clenched and held up protectively in front of his own face. But then, too quickly for Alden to even be surprised, the shining line of Lexi's whip was in front of them both. It bit into white metal with a shriek, and then the washing machine was flying up and over all of their heads. Alden spun, and saw Ruther phase out to let the front loader go. The washer sailed straight toward the object shaper's head. He raised his hands in time to make a shoving motion that knocked it away from him, and it hit the floor with loud metallic bang. Ruther had very nearly gone all the way through the appliance instead of grabbing it. The machine was butterflied open, inches away from being in two pieces. Yes. Khan was looking from the washer to his brother. Way to go, Lexi. Good. But I get the next one, Hoyu said. Lexi's success was slightly undermined by his look of surprise, and a voice yelling, "What did you throw it at me for?" from behind them. Alden was already back to studying the obvious threats. Galacoris was running alongside the bleachers toward the finish line. "Where is she going? At least we've got a second or two without wind." Instructor Waker was reaching into the pile again, and Ignacio's grandmother was heading off to one side. Klein and the gendarmes all seemed content to stand right here in the middle of the gym, not attacking. Yet. "Don't hold anyone back. Run as soon as it looks like you need to." Everly whispered the words so quietly that Alden wouldn't have caught them if they hadn't come from right behind him. Before he could ask who she was talking to, she took a deep breath and sprinted for the starting line. Khan looked startled. Lexi was busy staring from the washing machine to Ruther's handle with his brow furrowed. And Hoyu was fixated on his parents and Big Snake. "She's right. We need to run while we can," said Alden. "What?" Hoyu asked. "Running. Come on." He took off after Everly, trusting that the others would join them. "Don't hold anyone back." Everly had been upset to be at the back of the pack when they were all escaping from the span, even though it was a pack full of Avowed who were better suited for running than her. She'd been trying to ask Lexi for training tips since then. Alden assumed she wanted to be able to take care of herself, but maybe a fear that she was holding others back and putting them at risk was a part of the mix, too. That's a bad feeling. "Don't hold anyone back" was also just a part of being around so many people with cool abilities. Easier said than done, though. He caught up to her right away, and a step later, just as he decided he would run with her instead of dashing ahead, the wind came again. For some reason, Galacoris had done nearly a whole lap of the gym instead of taking the quickest path to her destination, one of the corners near the starting line they were running toward. Alden had seen the superhero lifting her hands, and he had guessed that the wind would be hitting them from a diagonal since the last two times. Instead of getting fancy, Vandy's mother had only done the most basic of shaper moves. It was just a shove straight away from her. Although it was, admittedly, a very big shove. He bent his knees and tried to prep to take the hit. He had just enough time to wonder if crawling would work better than running before Everly fell. At exactly the right angle and with enough force to knock one of his feet out from under him and give the wind the opening it needed. An instant later, they were both on the floor, holding hands in a barely helpful attempt to halt their sliding tumble across the smooth surface. Alden got slapped in the eye by the tail end of a silver braid, but that was hardly worth thinking about when he was being pummeled by a hurricane. The power of the wind was astounding. He caught glimpses of other people's struggles as he dealt with his own. Fibri was doing something bizarre with his instant corner skill to cross the floor to where Soren was pressed against the barrier. Fibra looked like he was repeatedly falling and then unfalling. Soren looked like he was trying to shape. Alden had no idea what light was going to do to fight wind, but he guessed there was no harm in trying. He spouted Eloisa, brute forcing it toward where they all wanted to go, just repeatedly launching herself in the right direction every time she got a hand or foot solidly against the floor. She was almost there. One of her arms was stiffened in her suit, though, so there were penalties for injuries that made her simple tactic risky. Some people had left weapons and supplies on the bleachers, as Alden had, expecting to go back and grab what they needed when they found out what the assignment was. Others who'd brought their things had lost them in the first surprise gust and had yet to recover them. He saw a couple of spell ingredients blow past, and the pink sweatband that Olive often wore was in flight. He heard people shouting instructions or asking for help. He heard what sounded like the washing machine smashing into something. It was all too much to analyze when even breathing was more difficult than normal in this much wind. One of his sneakers screeched as he managed to plant the soles of his shoes against the floor and get some traction to control their slide. The gym unitard fabric was a little slippery, which wasn't helping anything. It feels like it's been blowing for ages already. It's probably only been a few seconds. What if Galacoris doesn't let up? I don't want to get injured at the start of class. I need a shield. Now. Everly was clinging to his left arm. Hey! Can't I hold you? Alden shouted in her ear. I'm not tired. She shouted back. that confused him for a beat. Did she think he was offering her a relaxing break? He couldn't even sit up straight. "Can I preserve you and use you as a shield?" Everly didn't answer. "Against the wind. If I have eye shield, I think I can get us both." "Yes," Everly said, brown eyes meeting his. She had white glitter eyeliner on. "Do it. Go." He targeted her. Everly had been on his obstacle course team, so she was aware of how he needed to carry things. That meant he didn't have to explain anything, but she seemed to feel the sudden need to explain that she weighed 48 kilograms as she scrambled to get on top of him. "That's funny of her," he thought as he wrapped his arms around her back. Getting on his feet with his Everly shield preserved was less troublesome than he'd expected, and once he was standing, the difference made by having a shield, even a 48-kilogram one, was immense. He could have strolled to his goal if not for his fear that Morrison Waker might be winding up to hurl a blender at his back. So he hustled, and when his feet crossed the black line and the wind cut off, he felt a rush of success that was probably too optimistic for a guy that had just made it to the start, instead of the finish. "Form team of 5 to begin." He read the words on his interface as he set Everly down. She took a step back, gave him a cautious smile, and then looked in every direction briefly like she was analyzing where she'd ended up. "I carried you for ages," said Alden. "It's Friday now. I figured you'd be glad to skip to the weekend faster." Chapter 191. From where Alden stood now, he could see, and appreciate, all of his classmates' efforts to resist the wind. He and Everly were in the minority who'd made it to safety, but most of the others weren't far behind. Finley and Winston were both over. Marcia was here, shifting her mutable haft into spear mode and eyeing all the new superheroes she was allowed to attack like Christmas had come early. And Eloisa was standing just a few feet away from Alden and Everly with both of her arms fully functional. Alden hoped that was an indicator that injured people could get a mobility reset by returning to the start and not a one-time thing for the beginning of class. Getting hurt and having to deal with it for 2 hours was instructive, but not the kind of instructive he wanted this evening. "I'm going to go ask her what the pain realism setting felt like," Everly said. "I only got some bumps, and the readout didn't appear. She'll know better." "Thank you for getting me here." "Thank you for getting me here," Alden replied. Still on the floor, but approaching steadily, Hoyu was looking cool as heck. He was serving as a point of stability for Con, Lexi, and a few other fortunate souls he had collected on the way. One solid rock whose feet wouldn't come off the ground was a valuable resource in a nearly barren gym under assault by a shaper of sky. "If we are going to be attacked frequently or constantly by Gallicorus during this class, I'm going to need a good shield." A whole person wasn't the ideal choice. The easy bird nest shield method wasn't going to be awesome in high winds either. If he lost preservation for even a second, it would all go flying like streamers. And making something would take at least a little while, so he needed to get moving. The starting line was on one of the shorter sides of the massive rectangular gymnasium, and his duffel bag was on the long side near the midline, where everyone usually dropped their stuff if they weren't sure they were allowed to have it on the floor. He ran for it. What are the rules exactly? He wondered as he pounded around the perimeter toward his bag. There wasn't a countdown for them to obey, so it seemed like they were being given as much time as they wanted to form teams and strategize. That was exciting, but at the same time, he thought everyone would probably want to get going as soon as possible. The promise of a very desirable prize for reaching the finish, the fact that the instructors weren't known to go easier on people toward the end of class. Obviously I have to do something with rope. The practice with your chosen tool for the quarter rule was a given. And if Big Snake was going to be throwing additional materials onto the battlefield, Alden could use those, too. But are we allowed to do something ridiculous like use my supplies to tie a whole team to Hoyu? Is that cheating? Just then, Vandy's mother passed by him, running on the dangerous side of the barrier. She looked a lot like her daughter. Alden was almost positive he'd seen her on a perfume commercial that had played all the time when he was little, that one where her wind kept carrying the fragrance around a city, And at the end of the day she turned around and there were like 1,000 people chasing her and she made the shocked face. Yeah, that was her. And perfume commercials are weird. He was sure Galacors could run faster than she was right now. He was also sure she didn't need to reposition at all to blow people around the gym in whatever direction she chose. She was limiting herself on purpose. So there are lots of rules for us to discover. He grabbed his bag and ran back toward the others. And take advantage of. Good. He would try to understand what all of the attackers' self-imposed limits were and think of this class as practice for his nightmare correction. Traveling across a dangerous landscape, under assault by chaotic entities that were stronger than him and behaving in ways that were difficult to predict. But not completely impossible if you knew a little something about what they had been before they became your enemy. He remembered Hoyu a few weeks ago, telling him what his mom had said about the CNH instructors training students' eyes by having tells, real or false, that could be discovered. Possibly, they were doing the same kind of thing here. Klein had said, figure it out. The first part of this is a brain game to learn what the rules are. The second part would be beating those rules. And the third would be winning the prize. A private lesson would be phenomenal. If I picked the right person, I could explain some of what I'm working on with Unipez and get help with that specifically. It would be an upgraded version of his practice at North of North, and the right teacher or volunteer wouldn't care that it was a personal goal he was after rather than general improvement. They are giving us 2 days. That means they want us to have a real chance of success. We work on any flaws we find today, and then on Friday, we come back ready to defeat the challenge. They are giving us 2 days, Jerry was saying grimly to Everly when he reached them. That means it will be hell, and they have no intention of letting us have victory today. Jerry had arrived with Hoyu and the others. She'd been riding piggyback on Hoyu the last Alden had seen. Now, she was glancing toward the middle of the gym, where stragglers who weren't lucky enough to have abilities that could handle the high wind, or to have been standing near friends who did, were struggling. Olive was getting rolled. Literally. She'd been trying to inch toward them all on her stomach, but she looked up, realized she was one of the last students on the floor still, and tried to shift to a crawling position. Alden winced as the wind caught her and flipped her. I was just thinking the same thing as Jerry. With a more positive take, he said, dropping his bag and squatting to unzip it. Teammates means I'll have plenty of entrusters. I can shield them and me from the wind, so I need something biggish for a shield. And if I'm working with rope. He wasn't the only one trying to gear up. Tayet was zipping over to check the supply room. They didn't tell us we could use weights and equipment from there, Vandy protested. They didn't tell us we couldn't either. Everly said, her eyes lighting up. She took off, and Jerry was right behind her with a couple of others. A second later, shouted reports of a locked closet and a single pile of elemental weights outside had caused more than half the class to stampede in the direction to claim the limited resources. Hoyu and Kant dashed off. Lexi was watching Alden weave his widest rope option, straps of flat yellow webbing, into a mat with only a few narrow visibility gaps. Do you want me to cut that for you? Lexi asked. Yep. Ruther flicked toward the piece Alden had been about to cut through and sliced it neatly. Do you want me to help you tie? Yep. Are we a team? Hoyu told a couple of people that we were already. Me, you, him. Con and Everly? Lexi nodded and started tying. Fabri and Shrike wanted either you or Hoyu for their team. That was surprising enough to make Alden's magically swift fingers pause for an instant. Why'd they want me? Windshield for Sauron, Lexi said quietly. They are planning to carry him through to the end, and they need someone to make sure he doesn't get blown away while they handle everything else. So they picked me or Hoyu? Makes sense. You can join their team if you want. No. I'm good. There's a real chance of them winning, Lexi said. Even with Soren. Probably true. With free team selection, the S's were likely to clique up. I haven't had time to think about it, Alden answered, but I'd rather bet on our ability to get along and not go after each other's throats than on raw power. Even their obstacle course teammates weren't without their frictions. Reinhard was a fine and talented person, and he'd add valuable range defense to any team he was on. But he defaulted to trying for a leadership role, which only worked if everyone else was okay with him being leader. Hoyu sometimes wasn't. Lexi often wasn't. And Alden preferred a situation where he gave a little and got a little in return. It was irritating to let someone have their way to reduce team drama and know that you'd have to keep doing it or force everyone to take a time out so you could insist on that old playground standby, taking turns. With his roommates, Con and Everly, he was sure they'd have a more democratic situation, and anything reasonable he wanted to try would get a fair hearing and at least one solid group effort. And who knows how long it would take to pick a perfect team and negotiate with them. There was already some evidence of stress between Astrid, who'd just arrived with Max and Jeffy, and Rebecca, who'd been waiting for her, assuming they'd team up together. Being fast to solidify a team has definite advantages. "Yeah, we'll be great together," he said, hands still moving. "The only thing we know for sure is that Instructor Waker is pitching, and Vandy's mom is turning the whole gym into a wind tunnel. So starting with 3 people who can handle the wind in some way is a solid choice." 3? Everly just needs her spell ingredient. The blue powder. And she needs a break in the wind to cast. That impression is fast, so she can get it off when Gallicourse lets up to reposition. It's not perfect in a group situation, since we'd all have to hold onto her or we'd go skidding across her ice patch like hockey pucks. But if she gets separated and needs to get back to us on her own, she can do it that way. The ice patch spell would also wreak havoc on anyone near her, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Alden had heard people questioning Klein about whether or not they could attack other teams. He was sure someone would try it to see what happened. Or because they thought it was necessary. He created a new group chat for the team and sent them all a message. "Do we think everyone who gets to the finish line gets the private lesson reward? Or not?" Klein had said anyone who made it, which Alden took to mean it was possible for the whole class to succeed. But if there were unknown rules to figure out, what if one team crossing the finish line triggered a wind speed increase or another attack of some kind from the adults? It would be a little unfair, but it also seemed to be within the realm of possibility. On the obstacle course, a member of the opposing team finishing had made an attack allowable, and with their gym classes so often being competitive it seemed likely that there would be some kind of additional benefit to finishing first. "Hoyu, let us number 1. "No worrying then. "Let us number 1, Alden said to Lexi as he cut another strap with Rither. "I'm almost done with this. If you think it's a good size for us to work with." The shield would be a rectangle large enough to provide total body coverage for him when turned vertically, or if turned horizontally, it should protect everyone from the bulk of the wind if they piled up behind it. You don't want it to be so unwieldy that you can't get it out of the way if something that would exhaust your skill is incoming, Lexi said. "That's right. I need to stay useful, not turn into dead weight for the rest of you to haul around." He looked at the shield. "Let's add some loops. I can tie stuff to it I need to carry, or they can be used as handles. Then I'll cast my word chain, and we'll go." He'd been waiting to see what class was like today before he decided whether or not to use My Body Becomes My Assistant. He needed to train without it at least half the time, since it wasn't always going to be available. "What other word chains are you going to get Loot to teach you?" Lexi asked. Before Alden could answer, the sound of a few people calling out encouragements made him glance up. "Olive, run. You can do it. Go, girl. Get up." The adjuster had been blown nearly to the other end of the gym until she'd ended up pressed to one of the side barriers. Illusions just didn't do anything to help with this kind of challenge. Now, Gallicourse was starting a repositioning lap, the wind was off, and Olive was climbing to her feet to make a run for it. "She's too slow," thought Alden, taking in Gallicourse's speed and comparing them. Vandy's mother seemed to have a set pace in mind for her repositions, and he assumed she'd be sticking to the plan even if it meant Olive couldn't recover fast enough to gain ground. Everyone who'd been stuck out there had made it back during the last pause, or they were crossing the line right now, except for Olive and Sanjay, who was stiff-suited head to toe. Did he die? Olive ran past his fallen form and pelted toward them all. "Way too slow," said Lexi. Hoyu had just returned with Everly and Khan. They were each carrying either a scent bag or a lithometer bag. "Should I go get her?" Hoyu asked. "I know it might delay us, but those are my teammates." A voice with an American accent rang across the gym. "Hold on, Olive. Don't let your spirit fail you. I'm coming." Winston Yellfeather, sunglasses on and face determined, left the safety of the sidelines and ran to the rescue. Alden stared at the sprinting speed brute's back, the words "don't let your spirit fail you," leaving a kind of hollow echo in his brain. Hoyu caught his eyes. "I have no comment," said Alden. He tied the last knot, then flexed his fingers in preparation for their next task. "You guys grab some rope from my bag. Whatever looks useful to you. There's a plastic zip bag full of dirt in here," Khan said, already helping himself to the contents of the duffel. "That's useful," Alden told him. "Well, it's more useful when there isn't wind, but let's take it." Winston had just reached Olive and picked her up. "Bridal style." "I'm word chaining," said Alden, "and then we're going for it together." Chapter 192. 90 minutes ago. "Thank you for coming," Torsten Klein said, running a hand over his short, salt and pepper hair. The expression on his face was wry as he addressed the small group of current and former superheroes who had assembled in a classroom in the Maja Physical Education building. "I'm sorry to put you all in desks like your students. The meeting room upstairs was booked." "I'm only offended you've bought new desks," said a woman whose long, deep brown hair spilled down the back of an old gray sweatshirt. Her dark eyes were lively, and she smiled as she took in the classroom. "We used to sit at tables that had so many names and hero mottos carved into the top that it was impossible to take a paper exam without your pencil stabbing through." "I remember those tables," Torsten said. "Not fondly, but I do remember them. It's good to see you, Hale. Did your husband change his mind about coming today?" "No. He's making sure the vending machines are still high quality. He'll be right back. We can get started without him. I'm here." A man entered the room and tossed Hale a bottled tea from the stash of snacks and drinks in his arms. He sat down in the desk beside her. "We haven't started gossiping about the kids yet, have we?" "Not yet," Torsten replied. "I think we're all at least familiar with each other, except maybe Aparna. Do you know our other volunteers?" He was looking at a woman with shoulder-length gray hair who sat near the classroom window. Sunlight glinted off a pair of earrings she wore that looked like pieces of jagged glass. "I know those two." She waved a hand toward the couple. "Hale, are you still letting Zhang Jianwei trouble you?" "Every day," Hale said, shaking her head. "What about the trouble she gives me, Mrs. Sethi? She's twice as difficult as I've ever been." "Then I only need to introduce you to Melanie." Torsten nodded toward the woman sitting in a corner desk, typing on a tablet she had brought with her. "Melanie Carrison is a shaper of Sky currently working under the name Galacourse. Most of the time, she's back and forth between Los Angeles and Tianjin as part of a sister city hero swap. Her husband trades between Tianjin and London. Their daughter, Vandy, is a Sky shaper in our new class here. And, Melanie, this is Aparna Sethi. She's an adjuster who was active in the '90s and early 2000s all over Southeast Asia. Now she's retired temporarily," Aparna corrected. "Only until this collection of grandchildren find their footing. Then I will be back to show the young people what I have learned." Torsten's lips quirked upward. "Retired temporarily from hero work. She teaches at Nyading, but her grandson Ignacio joined us here at Chilena North." The two women nodded at each other. "We do appreciate all of you being here today," Torsten said. "Some of our faculty members have been neglecting their own personal situations to keep the school running smoothly for the students in the aftermath of recent events. I know they're all grateful to have time off thanks to your generosity. I'm excited to see what the class is like," said Hoyu's father. "You've got several kids here who I watched grow up alongside our son. It will be a treat to get a look at what they're up to now that they've got their powers. I think you'll find them very green and a little clumsy with themselves," said Torsten. "But overall, We're pleased with the early signs of their progress. Now, one of our newer faculty members put together the class roster for your review. For some reason, he thought it would be amusing if all of the students were presented on wanted posters. The board behind him switched on, showing the entire class with each member's photograph framed by an Old West-style wanted poster. The Gendarmes and Aparnasethi laughed. Maybe it is a little amusing, Klein conceded. Anyway, I'll run you through the ones with more standard superpowers first, and then we'll talk about the ones who are a bit more difficult to work with. First, the Agility Brutes, starting with your own subclass. Hale shook her head. Terrible. I'm starting with Agility because it starts with A. Adjuster starts with A, said Aparna. Is this how you do things at Chelena North? The poor children. I'm starting with Brutes because they have more common abilities. And I'm starting with Agility because of the A. So here on the projection behind me we have Fabri. Fabri's poster expanded, and his photograph turned into a video clip of him in class. He has the same skill as you. I see how it is. Shameless favoritism. You're all worse than the students. Torsten said. Pay attention to Fabri. He's one of 3 Agility Brutes and our only S-rank Agi. Very sharp with instant corners, though with a skill at level 1. They went through the Agility Brutes quickly and soon came to the speedsters in the class. Our S-rank is Finley. Like most speed brutes starting out, he's almost entirely foundation point focused with the system still withholding active use skills. However, he does have an unusually high-ranked spell impression for a beginner. I doubt he'll find an opportunity to use it in this class, since he hasn't been casting it so far. But surface extension is in his repertoire. Next, we have Winston. He's a hard-working young man, who isn't always working hard in the direction I'd prefer. He applies impressive amounts of energy to his personal passions. Possibly to his own detriment. As you can see from this clip, he... Line of asterisks. Present. Line of asterisks. Don't let the haters get you down, win-win. Remember, you have faithful fans who will follow you anywhere. I'm one of them. And when someone asks you who you think you are to be telling lies revealing truths about their favorite new avowed, let your victory over those favorites be your answer. Star emoji. Kiss emoji. Pom-poms. Kiss. Star. Feather's favorite Nike. The comment had over 1,000 upvotes, so Feather's favorite Nike would be getting the autographed photo. And for the first time, Winston would be confessing to his fans that during periods of struggle, he kept special comments like these on his interface to pump him up throughout the day. Feather's favorite gets it, he thought, putting on his sunglasses with a practice snapping gesture he'd mastered for the camera. I get it. One day, everyone will get it. So now, let's get it done. Heroes didn't sit on the sidelines playing with rope while classmates were in trouble. And who else was going to want to team up with Olive and Sanjay after they'd seen them flopping around like dying fish in a tornado? There was this stupid misconception going around because of Alden, Jeffy, Everly, and that dick-headed Haggis-eater Finley, that Winston Heal Feather was a jerk. They were all in on it together. Except for Jeffy. Winston was sure Jeffy was only being used as a puppet by Everly, Max, and maybe even Constantine. Feather's favorite Nike had asked in her 4th highest rated comment this week why everyone liked Con so much when he sucked for an S, and that was a valid question. Why did people like him so much? What if he was a master social manipulator, and Winston was only just now realizing it? CNH was no joke. Everyone knew the training was hard, but the crazy games these other avowed played on the way to the top? Nobody had prepared him for classmates so desperate to one-up him that they'd bring another person's grilling grandparents into it. Psychos. Winston scooped up Olive before she could even thank him, and ran for the starting line. Saving her. Like a hero. Olive's alright. His fans wouldn't go nuts over her rescue. She wasn't popular. Her social media account was all games she liked and pictures from middle school. But a hero didn't only pay attention to the popular class members. That was something a real jerk would do. I'm going to make you famous today, Olive. You're welcome. I'll take care of you and Sanjay and Soran and one other struggling person who usually gets no attention. Glory. Fame. Every gym class was another chance. He would show them the way. The wind hit just before he made it, but Winston was a speed brute. In some languages, instead of speedsters, they were called travelers. And what kind of traveler would be stopped by a little wind? A lot of wind. Don't be afraid, Olive. She was wrapping her arms around his neck and tucking her face into his chest, which was so much better than when he'd first picked her up and she flapped around like a kidnapping victim instead of someone who was being saved. This footage would actually be usable now if she was fine with it. As he pushed for the line, Winston hunched over her protectively and fought the wind, roaring his defiance of Galacors, the haters, and people who used their Scottish accents for insinuating untrue things about their roommates. Olive's weight might have helped keep his feet on the floor a little bit, too. He'd give her credit for that when he talked about this moment. "Ah!" he screamed as he crossed through the barrier, trying to make sure it was a good, deep scream and not the understandably nervous one he'd made when Alden had tried to hit him with an alien general's nanogun. Olive was still holding on to his neck. Her plain brown eyes were kind of far apart, like an Artonan's. It was an okay look for a girl in Winston's opinion. Lots of actresses had that. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," Olive said uncertainly. "Thank you." This is a moment, Winston realized. Like the Alleglo agency talks about. His parents had hired them to boost him and prep him before he left America. They weren't great, he realized now. And Zedora was a different level. That was why he'd been having more trouble than he should have been. Had they prepped him for rabbits with wildly outsized ambitions and creepy Artonan connections? Or girls who'd been training to be snow princesses since they were 10, who could just swoop in and steal 14.3% of your fans with an aqua brute and a few ARF dogs? Or S-ranks that made alien cannibal parrot songs smash hits? No. But they taught me about moments. Those are real. This is one of them. Or it could be, if I seize it. Winston set Olive down and whipped off his own sweatband. She froze as he put it on her forehead and angled the words so that the nearest drone could have a clear shot of the Nita healing stitched on it. "Sorry it's not pink," he said, smiling at her. "But wear it until we find yours together on the battlefield." Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Despite Alden being a hold-up with his preparations, their team was about to be the second to officially start the challenge. They'd be right behind a very competitive-looking team that Max had put together in a blink. He was joined by Finley, Jeffy, Astrid, and Lucille in what had to be close to an ideal situation for him. He had managed to combine 3 S-ranks with a chipper morph brute who was good at perking up Lucille and cheering on Jeffy. And Max was looking useful himself right now, laying down his own and taking advantage of it in a new way. He was walking his own treadmill trap with Astrid on his back, while Jeffy and Lucille stood outside it, not immune to the wind but significantly harder to blow over now that they each had giant sandbags as ballast. They all seemed to be discussing something. Max was pointing at Ignacio's grandmother, who sat calmly off to one side. Alden didn't see any reason for them to have stopped so quickly after starting their run, but it was good that they'd solved the wind problem. He turned his attention back to his own team. Does anyone else expect the real fight to start when Winston finds the most aesthetically pleasing way to carry a Sanjay statue and finally gets him back, too? "I expect my dad to do something terrible to our team, and my mom to do something terribler," Hoyu said. "They are not to be underestimated." "Yeah, none of us are underestimating them," said Khan. "I don't think you need to worry about that. Do we just run?" Alden straightened from a final examination of his shield. "Or take a moderate pace? I didn't hear what the plan was while I chained up." "Jog," said Everly. "We'll stay behind you unless you're in danger. Everyone calls incoming." "By doing the clock thing," said Khan. "Locker rooms are 6. If the wind is off, we attack together. If the wind is on, we haven't figured it out. Something with me and Lexi and Hoyu?" "I don't remember you being included in that part of the plan," Lexi said. Happy humans heal their health with plant player vitamins, Khan answered in a sing-songy voice. Try the ones for healthy memories today. I remember that jingle. Hoyu said. Lexi sighed. Do we have to take him with us? Love you, too, brother. Khan slapped Alden's back. You go. We follow. Use the shield you made, not Everly. Alden stared ahead of them. The gym looked even larger than usual. Big Snake was holding a 2x4 at the finish line. Klein and the Zhangdamirs were still lying in wait, pretending to be harmless observers. Vandy's mother was taking off again, and it looked like she'd be positioning herself near the midline on the right, to blow directly from the side. That's new. It must be because there were teams progressing forward now. If she had the wind blowing the way it had been, she'd just be helping people toward the finish line. My shield goes directly between us and Gallicourse unless the situation changes. She's only doing a standard front shove, so that's where the wind should be coming from. I'll pay attention to the rules for any of the other attackers when I have them in sight. You guys focus on fighting. Rules? Khan asked. Alden was already stepping through the barrier with his shield angled toward Gallicourse, one arm through a loop on the back. He set a pace that was close to a jog for him. Hoyu was on his left flank, Lexi his right. Everly was keeping herself directly behind him so she'd take the minimum amount of wind, and she was tied to Khan by a long rope. Lexi was tied to Alden. The hope was that the Roberts brothers, as the only two who had no wind resistance talents, would be stuck to someone who had better options if the group got split. But Alden was afraid the rope was just going to get in the way. His shield of yellow webbing was turned horizontally, and it had a spare 50-kilo sandbag tied to the front of it. Alden wasn't sure which of them had gotten creative and added it, but it wasn't trouble to carry this way and they might find a use for it. Khan was hauling an even bigger one on his shoulder. Everly had a small one that she'd coated in layers of ice until it resembled a white bowling ball. Hoyu and Lexi were keeping themselves unencumbered. The jog ate the distance rapidly. They were approaching the middle of the floor, and nothing bad had happened. It was almost uncomfortably quiet. Alden was keeping his eyes peeled, so he saw when Gallicourse lifted her hands. He lowered himself a little, and slowed down a little, the others following suit as the air turned into a battering ram once more. Alden felt it against his lower legs, rushing past like a river. I like you, Alden, Khan said just loudly enough to be heard over the wind. Look at us not flipping through the air like shopping bags caught in a Speed Brutes draft. Thanks. Why aren't they attacking yet? Hoyu asked, peeking around the shield to see his parents and then poking his head back and with his hair sticking straight up. Winston only just crossed with Sanjay, said Everly. Maybe that, the wind ended. Alden followed Vandy's mother with his eyes as she repositioned, ready to get the shield between them again as soon as she stopped. Suddenly, he saw something strange. Ahead of them. It had been there 1 second and gone the next. Did you see that? I did, Lexi said. I don't know what that was. Let's wait for a second. Alden turned the shield toward Gallicourse as he paused. The whole group shifted even closer to him before stopping. What did you see? Hoyu murmured, poking his head out again to peer in the same direction as Alden and Lexi. It was like a flicker? Said Lexi. It didn't look like any of our classmates' spells. Alden had seen a bit more than a flicker, but still not enough to describe it in much detail. A wispy light that stretched from the floor into the air before disappearing. It was fast. Some kind of spell indicator? Said Everly. Ignacio's grandmother, Hoyu suggested. My parents don't have anything like that. Well, the gym might have made the indicator itself, Lexi said. To give us a cue? It's not necessarily a normal part of whatever spell was cast. Out of the corner of his eye, as he did another scan of the adults, Alden saw that Big Snake had his attention locked on Max's team as they moved forward again. Not in a straight line. They are deterring for some reason. Max might be dodging whatever the mystery spell is, Alden said softly. We should, too. Nobody argued. While they discussed the unidentified phenomenon, a third team had formed back at the starting line. Reinhard was leading a group of people Alden rarely interacted with outside of class. They were all ranks who were less ambitious, argumentative, and perfectionistic than the class average. Which meant they'd probably let the archer have his way. "Third team incoming, wind incoming," he said, starting forward. "I wish Klein and your parents would move," Everly groaned. "I'm getting a stomachache waiting for an attack that's not happening." Reinhard led his team out onto the floor. A second later Heloisa shouted, "Too slow, Medi." Greater than in Portuguese, and did the same with another group. All at once, as if the entry of a fourth team was a signal, the adults acted. Wind came from the left, hitting Alden's mat of webbing and rushing around his ankles again. Two more of the strange flickers appeared. He just barely managed to see them as he whipped his neck around. One flicker was way out in front of Reinhard's team. Heloisa's group would intercept another in just a few strides. And a board was flying from Big Snake toward Max like a javelin. And 3 S-rank brute attackers were entering the field. 2 were on the ground, running at the teams in the back. One was launching himself up onto an aerial block high overhead and then off again at an angle that would lead him toward Klein. 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 Alden yelled, unable to do the clock thing because there was no above our heads a clock. He barely stopped himself from yanking the shield around to intercept the incoming instructor. That would leave everyone vulnerable to Gallicourse. The others were already moving. They weren't too slow. With Klein coming in from a height, there was time for Lexi to get rather between all of them and the oncoming enemy, and for Hoyu to step in front of Everly with his fists raised, and for Khan to insert himself between the instructor and Alden's vulnerable side. It just wasn't quite enough. Klein's legs tucked up to skim over Rither's swipe, and his torso twisted away from Hoyu's strike. It was the same as in the classes where they were supposed to catch him. He was so good at dodging by millimeters. There shouldn't have been space in their tight little group for him to slip through without taking a hit, but he found one anyway. Alden knew the slow-motion replay would reveal a series of graceful, flawless micro-adjustments on Klein's part. Right now, though, it felt like a missile landing in their midst while everyone's attempts to stop it comically misfired. Klein's feet slammed into Constantin's right thigh, and Alden's eyes struggled to keep up with what happened after that. Instructor Klein was moving a lot to dodge a line of burning chain that was suddenly flying around them all. Alden felt heat graze his own chest and saw an icy bowling ball hit Klein's butt as he twisted. And he thought, "Ha! Fuck. This is bad. Khan. What about Big Snake? I need to look." Then a lamp was shattering against Hoyu's fist, shards of ceramic from its base showering over them all like stinging confetti. And Klein was gone from their group. "I kept the shield where it needs to be," Alden thought, drawing in a breath. Gallicourse hasn't repositioned. A lampshade was still flying across the gym toward Max's team. "Oh wow. Fuck," said Khan, laughing and cursing and clutching his leg while he lay on the ground. "I got the lamp," said Hoyu. "Lexi, what was Rither doing?" Alden asked. "You almost sliced me." "I'm all right. I can take a lamp." Heloisa said this was 20% pain. Khan demanded. "She's lying. She's crazy. She's a crazy woman who can't feel pain. That's why she can drink hot sauce like water." They were all talking over each other at the same time, except for Lexi, whose eyes were as wide as Alden had ever seen them, and Everly, who was on the floor. Alden glanced away from the 10 other things he was trying to keep track of to check on her. She looked annoyed. She also looked stiff from the chin down to her bare feet. "Are you dead?" he asked, shocked. "Or unconscious?" "Dead," Everly said flatly. "And I missed Klein's face, didn't I?" "You got a bum cheek with your ice ball," said Hoyu. "How are you dead?" "You're dead." "Why are you dead?" Khan asked. "Klein got you, too." Everly's eyes flicked to Lexi. Khan and Hoyu noticed at the exact same time Alden did. They all fell silent. The wind stopped. "Oh. Just a little accident, then," said Hoyu, bending down to pick Everly up. "Completely understandable. Could have happened to any, Lexi." "Did you kill my girlfriend?" Tope continued.